Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Mission Dharma. I am clearly not Howie Cohn. I think many of you may know me. I'm Mary Davis. I'm the president of the board here. I teach off and on, and I have my own sangha over in across the bay in Richmond. So let's just give it another minute or so for folks to arrive, and then we'll sit, and then we'll do our greetings when we have more folks here. Okay. So, I invite you to start settling in. You need to have a nice stretch. By all means, just saying hello to the body. Finding a posture that feels comfortable, has a sense of ease to it. And just checking in, what's present for you right now? What are you bringing with you to this sit? Perhaps you've had a hectic day. Maybe there's tiredness, restlessness, sadness, excitement. Just letting that be felt through the body and the heart. You don't have to change it or fix it. It may shift on its own during the sit, it may not. Either way, everything's welcome. Turning our attention away from the external world, our worries, our to-do lists, the past, the future. Just allowing yourself to land here, now. It's how he always says, putting the mind in the body and the body in the mind. Where awareness fill every crook and crevice of the body. Seeing the aliveness. Some curiosity. When you bring your awareness into the body and mind in the same place, what's predominant for you? What do you notice? And the mind is drawn to the places that are uncomfortable or painful. Can you meet that with a sense of compassion and care? Softening into it if we can, adjusting our body if we need to. And see what else is present. Just a sense of temperature. Maybe where you're at, it's still hot, it's humid. Maybe there's coolness. energy in the form of tingling or pulsing. Contact of the floor beneath your feet, feeling that connection with the earth, the grounding and steadiness, and sense of being held. The tush, sitting in the chair or the couch or the cushion. Just scanning through the body and seeing if there's any places where we're sort of holding on to tension, where we sort of chronically hold tightness. So checking around the eyes, having the muscles of the eyes be soft, relaxed. Mouth, the jaw. The whole face to rest. Don't need to be wearing any masks or look pleasant. Just let ourselves be. Shoulders, the neck. The shoulders float down away from the ears. Checking in if there's any constriction around our heart. The heart center, inviting it to open. Belly be soft. Inviting the sense of landing, of settling. Feeling the gravity. Body be heavy in the chair. Our awareness to the fact that we are being breathed. Body knows what to do. It's breathing. There's no I or me involved in it. The body's simply doing what the body does. It breathes. So can we just be with the body breathing and know that we're breathing? You don't want to make a big project out of it. Simply being with the breathing body with a sense of curiosity and kindness. There's a quote, I believe it's Suzuki Roshi, talks about sort of opening the doors and windows of our mind, and just letting the thoughts come and go. But his advice is just don't invite them for tea. Just let the thoughts come and go as they will. Just breathe and know you're breathing. Just as the body breathes on its own, the body also generates sensations, some pleasant, some unpleasant, neutral. The ears also receive sound. Can we also bring these into our awareness without taking them personally or making a story out of them? Being aware. Just as the body breathes and generates sensations and receives sounds, the mind thinks. It generates thoughts. So, can we be aware of our thoughts without taking them personally, without inviting them to tea, trying to figure things out, judge things, or whatever we do with our thoughts, wrestle with them? Can we simply allow them to rise and fall on their own? Just the thinking is happening. Nothing to congratulate ourselves for or to judge ourselves for. They're just thoughts. matter how, for how long or how far away the mind has strayed. The moment you notice that, you're back home. Simply begin again. Begin again. You begin again. As our practice period starts to come to a close, just want to encourage you just to maybe check in again, do a quick weather report. Now, what's the state of your heart, mind, and body? Has it shifted since you started? Judging, just noticing. It's present. Weren't able to hear the bell. You can start to transition from your practice period gently at your own pace. Back, if you don't mind, just turning on your camera for a moment so I know most people are arrived back. Oh. So why don't we go ahead and just do our greeting, saying hello, your name, where you're zooming in from, just so we get sort of a sense of community that we're here together. Just shout it out, folks. Don't be shy.
Hi, Stephanie from San Francisco.
Roseanne from San Francisco.
Hi, I'm Pete from Oakland.
Hi,
Mary from Santa Barbara.
from Canada. Hi, everyone.
Hi, I'm Eileen from Phoenix.
Mark from San Francisco.
Christopher zooming in from Richmond.
Jerry from Nashville. Big love.
Nashville.
It's never complete without the big love from Nashville.
Noemi San Francisco.
Howard Gilman from San Francisco.
Katie from San Francisco.
Oh,
Joe from San Francisco.
Lovely. We have a good representation from San Francisco. Anyone else?
From McKinleyville.
Hi, McKinleyville. So maybe the rest of you are shy. Feel free to put it in the chat. So, so before I start my talk, why don't I let my co-pilot, where'd he go, Howie G, and thank you very much for being here today. We had a very funny interaction because I hit him up at the last minute going, oh my gosh, can you co-pilot? I have to teach tonight. And when I showed up, he's like, why are you here? I'm teaching here. So any announcements, Howie?
Now that I'm embarrassed, I have just the one normal request about Donna. Just reminding everyone, Donna is the way that we sustain this Sangha. It's the way we sustain what we practice, and that it is more than welcome here. I think there's actually sort of suggested amounts of money that you can contribute if you have it. I think it's between $15 and $25 or something like that. but no one is turned away for lack of ability to pay. The Donna pays for the teachers who sit in the chair, and we've been very lucky to have Howie sitting in the chair for like about 35 years, and so lucky to have the people who have filled in for him, like Mary and other wonderful teachers here. And it's a way to show our support. Also know that, you know, time is important for everybody, and they, you know, the fact that they give up their time to serve us with their wisdom and help is very worthy. So that's it. I'm going to just click on a button and put the ways that you could contribute if you want. And lastly, Donna is often, you know, made through charity of money, but there's other ways you could serve this Sangha by volunteering. We could always use maybe another person or two on the tech side, and there's always room for people to help the board, etc. So if you want to get more involved, please contact through the email. And for the people who are involved, especially Mary tonight, thank you so much for stepping up, and everybody else. And thank you all.
Thank you, Howie. And I didn't mean to embarrass you. I just thought it was amusing. So anyway, thank you for any Donna that you offered. It's always greatly appreciated. So I think I'm just going to launch right in because I'm actually sort of excited about the topic. So tonight I'm going to talk about compassion, and I probably talked about compassion when I've been in this seat before because it's a topic that I'm fond of, and it's what really drew me to this path and has been a huge motivator in my practice. You know, after years of being wrapped up in my own small world of suffering, right? When I first heard the Buddhist teachings on compassion, I remember just feeling just hooked, you know, by this potential to see and feel beyond my own gripes and my own pain and my losses and gains, etc., you know, and to be able to open my heart, the possibility of opening my heart to this beyond this small circle of care, right? So I initially came to the Buddhist path through a Mahayana tradition, a Tibetan tradition. And as I'm sure many of you know, within the Mahayana, you have this ideal of the Bodhisattva. And a Bodhisattva is a being whose compassion is so vast and so unconditional and so deep that they're willing to delay their own enlightenment, their own ability to sort of step off this cycle of birth and rebirth. And whether you believe in birth and rebirth, that's up to you. But they're willing to just, you know, sort of stick around so that they can help others attain enlightenment. You know, they're the folks who are holding the door open, you know, and letting everybody else, you know, go ahead of them. And so they've perfected their bodhicitta, right? I'm sure you've heard that term before, bodhicitta, which is this heart of compassion and wisdom, whose motivation is really to help others, you know. And so I find this incredibly inspiring, you know, and just even the possibility. You know, I don't think I'm ever going to become a bodhisattva, but this idea of being able to expand that and even touching into it just a little bit. So this path of the bodhisattva, you know, it not only develops the heart, but also the wisdom, right? That sees our interconnection and this lack of this small self that we cling to so dearly. You know, it understands and it knows, you know, the first noble truth, right? That there is dukkha, right? And you can translate, and whether you translate it as suffering or discontent, things that are hard to bear, stress, right? Whatever word resonates for you, and sometimes just use dukkha just because that sort of encapsulates it. But it understands and knows the first noble truth, right? And that unlocks the other truths. So the first noble truth, we need to know dukkha. Not an intellectual construct. We need to know it. So when we're practicing compassion, not only are we knowing dukkha directly, but we're breaking down these illusory walls between us. So even when we see people who may be very different from us, people we may not even like, right? When we drop below the level of views and opinions, they're actually just like us, right? They just want to be happy. They don't want to suffer, right? And they also experience, like all living beings, they also experience the dukkha of loss and having to deal with things that they don't like, and losing things that they like, and aging and sickness and death. We're all subject to that. And so when we realize that on a very human to human level, we start to see even people that we think are very different, we're just living beings trying to get by. So compassion is the response of the caring heart of metta, right? Of loving kindness. So when we look at the Brahma Viharas, right, there's metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, right? So the foundation of all of those Brahma Viharas is this heart of metta, this open, caring heart that doesn't bear any ill will, and it just wishes for happiness, for happiness and peace and safety and health and well-being, right? All those phrases that we say in our metta practice, right? Just this open heart of friendliness and goodwill. And we know in our metta practice, right, we're going bigger, 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 right? We wish it for ourselves, we wish it for those close to us, we wish it for a neutral person, difficult person, and then we just blow the doors open and we wish it to everybody, right? That all living beings be free, that all living beings be happy and peaceful, etc. So maybe we're not there yet, right? But we're working, our practice is working on expanding this, making more room in our hearts for more beings, right? So in this open heart of metta, right, of loving kindness meets suffering, right? Those are the conditions, right? The response is this quivering of the heart, right? The sincere wish that you be free from your suffering. And this also may arise this desire to help if we can. In her book, Loving Kindness, Sharon Salzberg writes, the goal of spiritual practice is to be able to understand, to be able to look without illusion at what is natural in this life, at what is happening for ourselves and others. This willingness to see what is true is the first step in developing compassion. So when we're practicing our mindfulness, right, we're seeing what is happening. We're seeing things as they are, stripped of stories and opinions. And so as we see this, we also see the dukkha. So this awareness of suffering, when it meets a heart that cares, these are the conditions for compassion to arise. We need both of these, an open heart and a willingness to see and to be with the dukkha. Our tendency sometimes is like when we meet the suffering, is just kind of fall back in some of our usual strategies, right? Maybe we distract ourselves, or we turn away, we blame, we get angry, or maybe we just numb out. Or a really common reaction is to want to immediately go in and fix. You want to help. And while this desire to help is a natural outgrowth of compassion, often that desire to fix is coming more out of a sense of our own discomfort with the suffering and wanting to make it go away as quickly as possible, right? It's like, ooh, this isn't good. I need to fix this because I'm not comfortable with this. So sometimes we can easily fool ourselves, thinking that our actions are for the benefit of another person or being. But when we check, right, it's really about ourselves. It's wanting to move away from the discomfort. So, because I think we've all had this experience at some point or another where we're having some sort of distress, we're upset about something. It could be big, it could be little. And we have a friend or relative who comes over and immediately starts to tell us what to do, right? You know, they try to fix the situation, or even worse, sometimes they try to fix us, right? And so we can see that their intentions are really, you know, their intentions are good. It's probably coming from, you know, from caring. You know, maybe they're acting out of love, but it's not what we need, right? We just want someone to be able to sit with us, to listen, to understand. You know, want someone to be with us in our suffering, not just to put it, you know, push it away, right? Because the Latin of compassion is with, right? That sense of being with it. So another common reaction to, you know, when we encounter suffering is sometimes to take it on ourselves, right? Maybe we relate a little bit too much, right? And so we find ourselves lost in despair, and then we're the ones who need help. I think sometimes watching the news can bring us to the state of collapse because it feels overwhelming and it feels hopeless and it feels too big. And in this state of collapse, we're no longer able to be of support because we need support ourselves. And then compassion, rather being this energizing force for good, then becomes something heavy. The Dalai Lama says, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. So compassion is not meant to be this heavy thing, right? Even though we talk about it as like it's meeting suffering, but it doesn't have to be this heavy thing. You know, while we're in touch with the suffering, we're not suffering about the suffering. We're not shooting that second arrow. We're simply in touch with things as they are. And we're able to hold this with a sense of equanimity, right? That understands that there are 10,000 joys and there are 10,000 sorrows, and that everything is impermanent. It's passing, right? And so being able to have that sense of balance, you know, our heart can stay open, you know, for all of it. In the last few years, I've lost two very dear friends to cancer. And I remember when the first friend was diagnosed, and he was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer. And it had already spread to his bones. So there was no hope for a cure, right? I mean, all treatments were really going to be to extend his life and to make him comfortable. And this friend, Frank, was so widely loved. He had all of these communities that he was just the center of, and people were just crazy about him. You talked about Frank, and everyone's like, oh, I know Frank, you know. And so when the word got out that he had cancer, you know, people were literally tripping over themselves to go into help mode, right? They were sending him articles about alternative treatments and recommendations for doctors, and people offering to drive him places and to make him food. And the ironic thing was, like, when he got diagnosed, he was still really lively. He was a river guy, for crying out loud. And he was still, you know, guiding trips on the through the Grand Canyon. So he was, but people really wanted to do something to feel like they were being helpful. And then still others, some, you know, fell into despair. His sister really fell into a very serious depression. And of course, I had my own reaction. You know, I'm not innocent of this, right? I wanted to help too. In fact, I wanted to be the best helper. I wanted to be the most important helper, right? And so fortunately, I have my practice. And so it helped me to pause and ask, you know, what is this impulse to help? You know? And when I sat with it, I realized that it was a way of avoiding the discomfort of being with his fear and devastation. It was a way to try to do out of my own sorrow and the inevitability of losing my best friend. So I sat there for a while, and I was able to sort of step out of myself and refocus, not on my own panic and discomfort, but instead, what was needed. And when I asked him, I said, what do you need? And it was someone he could talk about death with without freaking out. So we had a lot of long conversations, about death and, Buddhist beliefs about death. And so, we might not have gotten there if I was still like, yeah, let me drive you somewhere. It's like, oh, what's needed? And then I had another friend that just passed about a year ago. And it was interesting. She avoided the whole situation altogether. She didn't tell anyone except for her husband and me for about a year after her diagnosis. And like my friend Frank, she had a very wide circle of friends and was loved and admired, but she couldn't bear the idea of people, treating her with kid gloves, or, having to hold their fear or hold their sadness, or God forbid, feel pitied. Because the near enemy of compassion is pity. Right? Really want to, pay attention when we're falling into pity instead of compassion. Because pity recognizes suffering, but there's no connection there, because there's not a heart connection there. It lacks the metta. Sometimes the resultant action may be the same, that from compassion or pity. Perhaps, with compassion, we, like if we give a few bucks to a homeless person, right? That could either come out of a sense of feeling a felt sense of connection and true compassion, or with pity, it could just be you're motivated to be seen as a good person, or a sense of, wow, sucks to be him, have a buck, dude, or to make them go away because they make us feel uncomfortable, right? So with our compassion, it may give rise to helping. It's a natural outgrowth that we, when the heart is moved, there's a movement to want to be able to be of some service, of some aid. But we don't want to, bypass being able to be with the suffering, because it's being with that is where the wisdom that will help us discern what is the right thing to do, what is truly needed, right? Because we're seeing things as they are. And so it's like, okay, then we can pause and we're not in this big reaction mode, and we can see what's needed and not just what's going to make us feel better. There's a Buddha called Queen Tara. Some of you may have heard of her. And she is considered the Buddha of compassionate action. And when you see pictures of her or statues of her, unlike the other Buddhas who are sitting in, meditative equipoise, and their eyes are closed and their legs are crossed and they're just very chill. She has that, right? She's got that meditative equipoise, but her right leg is out, right? So, she hears the cries of the world and she's ready to respond. And so I always just love that about her. It's not just she's going to sit and meditate on it. There's things that she's got to do, but she's also going to take it in. She's going to respond from a place of wisdom and not from reactivity. A few years back, Pema Chodron was here in Richmond. I'm in Richmond, at this venue called the Craneway. And anybody who's familiar with it, it's a pretty big venue. And so there were hundreds of people for this weekend retreat. And, she had a period for Q&A, like a couple times a day. And so there were microphones in the aisles, and so many people lined up. there's just these huge lines, for people to ask their question of her, to speak to her. Even to the point where you're like going, there's no way they're going to get to the end of this line, but people were really just sort of hoping that maybe they'd have the opportunity. And when people finally had a chance to speak, they didn't have practice questions. These were not technical, these were not theoretical questions, right? Rather, they told these heartbreaking stories. Somebody who just received a terminal diagnosis, somebody whose child who's died, somebody who's on the brink of homelessness. And what's really stood out for me from that is just watching Pema Chodron. And I remember she got up from, I believe she was sitting on a chair during that retreat because she was having problems with her hips or knees or something. And she just stood at the edge of the stage. And she was just still. And she just received it. She wasn't fumbling around with a lot of like, oh my gosh, that's awful, I'm so sorry. She just received it. And she was just there, and she was just this presence of love and compassion. And so you can tell she was listening with her heart just wide open. There was nothing detached about it, even though she was just listening and just holding. And she did respond. There were responses, but I don't remember the responses. What I remember was that presence, that compassionate, strong presence that was just there with the suffering, their heart open, and could hold it without flinching. And it was so powerful for me. I mean, that really is, when I think about it, it's like, that's who I want to be when I grow up, right? To be able to stand in the face of suffering and to be a source of refuge and comfort, and just letting people be heard and held. But we are not all Green Taras or Pema Chodron quite yet, right? So we need to be able to approach this practice of compassion, this heart of compassion, in a way that encourages our expansion and doesn't burn us out. In addition to a caring heart, it takes courage and strength to sit with the suffering of the world. Our strategies for avoiding suffering is not because we're bad or uncaring people, but rather it's a way of protecting our tender hearts. So we need to learn how to offer the same compassion to ourselves. If we wish to hold others with this open, caring, courageous heart, we need to be able to hold ourselves in our own distress with the same. Because if we don't, we'll just collapse. It's like there is so much suffering in the world. There's so much suffering. I mean, even in our own little worlds. We don't even have to look at the broader world. Just looking around us, our friends and family and coworkers and just neighborhoods, we can see and feel the suffering. And so if we're trying to hold that without any way of resourcing ourselves, we're just going to burn out, right? We're just going to, or maybe just go through the motions, right? Because our heart has kind of closed up shop out of self-protection. Or even worse, we harden our hearts. We refuse to see it. We refuse to open to it. I remember years ago, I was meeting with Howie, and I was talking about how I regretted I had many lost years where I was going through a lot of trauma and suffering, both inflicted by others and by myself. And I lost years to drinking and deep depression and basically spiraling out of control. And then more years afterwards recovering from all of that, right? And I remember, I think it came up because I was sort of looking at some of my younger Dharma siblings, and I was envious, right? That they found this path, so when they were still young. And, and then I had a lot of comparing mind, of course. And I remember Howie telling me so clearly He said, you don't need to regret or feel guilty or shame, about who I had been and what I had been through. Because I can turn all of that into manure for my bodhicitta, right? We can take all the shit that we've been through, and if we can use it, right, to build this heart of compassion, it's worth it, right? I mean, I know I have a lot of, stinky compost, to work on my bodhicitta. And so, so it's using that pain to be able to understand and hold the pain of others. I used this quote today in the reminder, which says, compassion asks us to look into our own hearts, discover what gives us pain, and then refuse under any circumstance whatsoever to inflict that pain on anyone else. Quotes from Karen Armstrong. Right? So if we're able to sort of be with and look at our past pain, our current pain, and go, I don't want anyone else to feel this. Right? So we need to be able to recognize that ourselves, so that we just go, even if I don't believe, I disagree with this person politically, or they annoy the hell out of me, I still don't want them to have to experience the same sort of, suffering I've experienced. So that way we can use our compassion to broaden that circle of care. And then Shanti Deva, who wrote the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, he was an 8th century Indian philosopher, a Buddhist monk. He wrote, moreover, suffering has good qualities. Through experiencing it, we can dispel pride, develop compassion for those trapped in samsara, and that's all of us, right? Abandon non-virtue and delight in virtue. And it's such a radical thought. That's so, this idea that suffering can have good qualities, because we spend most of our lives, and our whole culture is set up around avoiding suffering, around distracting ourselves and keep looking for pleasure, anything to not have to sort of feel displeasure and to feel pain. So to say, moreover, suffering has good qualities, and talks about how it's like we can develop compassion. It helps us follow, the path, right? So, we're able to reframe our suffering of the past into something that we can learn from, something that we can apply to our path of awakening, rather than getting mired in regret or shame, right? When we get caught in rehashing the past, right? It's like, oh, there it is. Okay, I can use this. I can use this for good. But when we notice that we're suffering in the present, right? Something is happening. It's physical, it's mental, relational. It's, there's just, we recognize that we're in some sort of state of distress or suffering or stress. We can turn to it with compassion rather than judgment, or blame or anger, or whatever our usual mode is, right? We all have our own patterns in terms of how we respond to things. So rather than treating ourselves like a stern taskmaster, it's like, oh, you shouldn't feel this, or it should be like this, or of course you screwed up, or whatever, whatever the voice is saying. We turn and we treat ourselves as we would a good friend who was going through the same thing. It's always such an interesting test to sort of, when I hear that inner voice being very critical or being very judgmental, it's like, what would I say to a friend who was going through the same thing? Well, I sure as hell wouldn't be saying that, right? So there's a quote from the Buddha that is repeated here often and elsewhere. It says that you can search all of the world and nowhere will you find anyone more deserving of your affection than yourself. Right? And so that's, the metta, the loving kindness, but that also includes compassion. They're the flip side of the same coins, right? The heart of metta wishes you to be happy. The heart of compassion wishes you not to suffer. So if your compassion doesn't include yourself, it's incomplete. So you may have heard of the self-compassion break. It was developed by Kristen Neff, sort of the mother of mindful self-compassion. She's a psychologist and a Dharma practitioner, and I think she was a mentee of Howie's for a while. And so the self-compassion break has 3 parts, and it's, you can do all of this like in less than a minute, however long you want to sort of stay with it. And so when we notice that suffering is present, in ourselves, we can pause and simply acknowledge it. It may be something like, oh, this is hard, or wow, I'm really feeling sad, or loneliness is present, or I'm really pissed off. Or my favorite, I simply just like, ouch. I'm just hurting right now. Ouch. Because to me, that shortcuts all the whole story and things like that, right? So we turn towards the suffering and just let it be felt in our hearts and in our body, right? We don't get involved in all the stories about it. We don't relive the circumstances. We don't turn to try to fix it or to figure it out or make it go away. We just feel it. Ouch, right? Maybe a hand on the heart kind of helps us get in touch with that. And then, sort of recognizing it, being with it, feeling it, we sort of expand our scope, we kind of broaden our view, and then we remember that this suffering is just part of being human. That other beings have suffered, will suffer, are suffering in the same way. I'm not alone. I'm not alone. This is part of being human. Because the thing about our suffering is that it can make us feel really isolated and really separate. So it's important that we remind ourselves that we're not alone. Suffering has this way of playing with us, and that our suffering is very unique. No one else has been hurt like this. We build this whole story, this whole ego thing about it, when it's just like, no, this is just heartache. I don't even have to look that far to find heartache. Other people are experiencing this too, right? And so once we remember that, then we can finally ask, what do I need in this moment? How would I treat a good friend who's going through the same thing? Perhaps reassuring words, perhaps a gentle touch, permission to rest or to cry. And then we offer that to ourselves. We give ourselves that. So we let our suffering be seen and held, and it's responded with an open heart. Doesn't necessarily fix it, but I think we've all experienced how the sense of relief and maybe just a little bit more openness when our suffering is being held and it's being seen, it's being taken care of. And so finally, just a word about within sort of the Brahma Viharas, we talked about, the metta and the karuna, the compassion. Mudita, right, is sort of the other side of the compassion, right, is being able to be with people's joys. But equanimity is what helps us hold all of this. This mind of equanimity, our own suffering and the suffering of others, right? Equanimity helps us appreciate our joy and the joy of others. Equanimity balances compassion with the understanding that things are as they are, right? And that while we may care deeply, but we can't control everything. There's that wisdom there. It goes, this really hurts, but some of these things are just not under my control. A lot of it's not under our control, right? It's equanimity that has the open-hearted wisdom to recognize that there are 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows, and that they're all impermanent and none of it's personal, right? So we have that wisdom along with the open heart. As I've been talking a little bit about our friend Pema Chodron, I just wanted to close with this quote from hers. She says, "Life is glorious, but life is also wretched. It is both. Appreciating the gloriousness inspires us, encourages us, cheers us up, gives us a bigger perspective, energizes us. We feel connected. On the other hand, wretchedness, life's painful aspect, dukkha, right, softens us up considerably. Knowing pain is a very important ingredient of being there for another person. When you're feeling a lot of grief, you can look right in somebody's eyes because you feel like you haven't anything to lose. You're just there. The wretchedness humbles us and softens us. But if we were only wretched, we would all go down the tubes. We'd all be so depressed, discouraged, and hopeless that we wouldn't have the energy to eat an apple. Gloriousness and wretchedness need each other. One inspires us, the other softens us. They go together. Well, anyway, that is my offering for tonight. Has any questions or comments? I think I could probably field one or two before we're out of here. The way it made sense. If no one has any comment, we can just kind of sit quietly for a moment and then I'll just do a quick dedication and then we
Looks
can.
like Evelyn has opened her mic, I think. Is that right, Evelyn?
No, I don't have a question.
Oh,
Okay.
Just
Sorry.
preparing to say thank you and good evening to everyone.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so let's just settle back for a moment. I've said a lot of words. Just seeing where they land. Way, what we can leave behind. And also just sense into the holding power of the community of Sangha. A wonderful place where we can practice compassion. If there's been any benefit or goodness from our coming together, may we spread that far and wide to those known and unknown, those near and far, those that are dear and those that are difficult, human and non-human. May all living beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all living beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And may all living beings have peace. Feel free to unmute and say farewell to each other.
Thank you.
Good night,
That
all.
was beautiful.
Thank you.
Mary.
Thank
Good
you.
night,
Good
Mission
night.
Donna.
Night,
Thank you,
everybody.
Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye,
Mary.
everyone.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
so much.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Mary.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mary.
Bye.
It's
You're
wonderful.
welcome. Bye. Thank you.
Mary.
Good night.
Night, everyone.